Everyone mocked me as a kept man who lived off his wife. But in Isabella's eyes, I was the anchor that allowed Sterling Industries to charge into battle without worry. Her streak of victories in the boardroom was fueled by the simple fact that I was home simmering soup, keeping the lights on for her return. She even told the shareholders that her greatest achievement wasn't taking the company public or closing billion-dollar deals. It was the day she stood in City Hall and signed her name next to mine, marrying a man who supposedly brought nothing to the table. Hearing those words made my heart race faster than any stock market surge, but not in a good way, because it meant the safety of our contract was gone. I was forced to face her head-on, accepting the ring she offered and her sudden vow to spend our lives together. The irony was that today was our anniversary, yet it was also the day my contract wife, Isabella Sterling, headed to the airport to greet her first love. I stood at the back of the crowd like a ghost, clutching a thermos of homemade soup I had prepared for her. The man she was meeting was Julian Davenport, looking every bit the billionaire in a bespoke suit with a Patek Philippe that caught the terminal lights with an arrogant shimmer. When his eyes landed on me, a sneer spread across his handsome face. "Davis, are you seriously still clinging to Isabella after 3 years?" he mocked. "Don't you feel pathetic being a house husband? I'm embarrassed for her just looking at you." My marriage to Isabella Sterling had been a business arrangement from day one. 3 years ago, the Sterling patriarch made a deathbed demand that his workaholic granddaughter get married to silence the tabloids and secure her grip on the family empire. She eventually settled on me, Davis Vance, an orphan with zero social standing. Back then, I was a low-level grunt at a forgettable firm in Queens, making pennies and living in a studio so cramped I could practically touch my neighbor through the window. My only assets were a decent set of features and the fact that I knew my way around a kitchen. Our first meeting was a staged encounter orchestrated by her assistant, who presented me with an offer that was impossible to turn down. It was a 3-year contract that included a luxury penthouse in the heart of Manhattan and a $50,000 monthly allowance. My only job was to step up and play the part of Mr. Sterling whenever the occasion called for it. To a guy like me, it felt like winning the lottery, so I signed the papers without a second thought. When we showed up at City Hall, the clerk gave us a look of pure confusion. It was a bizarre sight, the ice queen of Forbes standing next to a nobody in faded jeans. We looked like two people from entirely different universes. Isabella was a statue throughout the ceremony, barely uttering a word. The moment the marriage certificate was in her hand, she turned to me and said, "Davis, remember our deal." She told me that her private number was for emergencies only. Then she climbed in her black Bentley and sped off. I was left standing alone on a freezing street corner, wondering what I had just gotten myself into. Overnight, I went from being a corporate drone to a trophy husband in a gilded cage. We moved into a massive duplex at the top of Elysian Tower, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The place was breathtakingly huge, but it felt as cold and empty as a tomb. Isabella handed me a credit card with no limit and told me to buy whatever I wanted, but our lives remained separate. She took the master suite while I was relegated to the guest room at the far end of the hall. That long corridor felt like a canyon neither of us would ever cross. We spent 3 years following the terms of our contract with clinical precision. I took my role as the perfect house husband seriously. Knowing her stomach was sensitive and her schedule was grueling, I mastered the art of healthy, soothing breakfasts. I packed them into a thermos every morning and dropped them off at her office. Since she was a light sleeper who woke at the slightest noise, I handled every household chore myself, and even learned to move through the penthouse on tiptoe. I was well aware that her circulation was poor, making her hands and feet ice cold even in the summer, so I made sure her electric blanket was warm before she got home. I always left a fresh pot of honey ginger tea on her nightstand. She noticed these things, though her only response was a polite thank you on my birthday, followed by an expensive watch delivered by her assistant. During the holidays, she played the part of the doting wife perfectly at family functions, but the performance ended the moment we left the party. We were so polite, it was awkward, living like two strangers who happened to share a zip code and a kitchen. She never pried into my life, and I stayed out of her business. The only time we ever touched was when she let me hold her hand to appease her grandfather. Her hand was always soft and elegant, but it felt like ice in mine. I assumed we would just coast along until the 3 years were up, at which point we would shake hands and go our separate ways. I realized too late that I had overestimated my own emotional distance. Somewhere between the daily routines and the thousands of meals I cooked for her, I lost my way, sitting under the glow of the living room lamp, waiting for her to come home night after night. I fell hopelessly in love with this woman who hid her profound loneliness behind a wall of ice. I knew it was pathetic. I wasn't even her partner. I was just a glorified, high-priced butler with a marriage license. I had no right to feel this way, so I buried my feelings as deep as they would go. My plan was to finish the last few months of the contract and make a quiet, dignified exit. That plan evaporated the moment Julian Davenport showed up and shattered my delusions. The atmosphere in the penthouse turned suffocating after that run-in at the airport. Isabella was pulling longer hours than ever, often not returning until dawn or staying at the office entirely. Meanwhile, Julian Davenport became a constant, irritating fixture in our lives, buzzing around like a fly that wouldn't take a hint. He had a habit of showing up unannounced with expensive gifts, claiming he was just stopping by to check on Isabella. He would sit regally on the Italian leather sofa, a piece of furniture I usually avoided, and scan the room with the predatory gaze of a man who already owned the place. Isabella's tastes haven't changed a bit. She still loves this pretentious Blue Mountain coffee, he remarked, sipping the cup I had just prepared as if he were the lord of the manor. He looked at the dinner I had spent an hour on and sneered. King crab is in season, Davis. Why are you serving her this pathetic frozen seafood rice? It is honestly embarrassing. He continued his verbal assault, gesturing at the meal I had carefully crafted. I have to ask, Davis, are you really content just playing house in the kitchen? A woman like Isabella deserves someone with actual ambition. Do you honestly believe you belong in her world? His words felt like a heavy boot grinding my dignity into the floor. I had no choice but to take it in silence, because his words were rooted in a painful truth. In their elite social circle, I was nothing more than a background character. A few days later, Julian showed up again, this time trailing a flashy influencer, claiming he wanted to host a tea ceremony to liven up the place. I was in the kitchen prepping vegetables when Isabella's icy voice cut through the air from the living room. This is my home, Julian, not your personal social club, she snapped. If you're here as a guest, sit down, but if you're here to show off, there is the door. Julian stammered, trying to save face, saying he was just trying to bring some energy to the apartment. I don't care for the noise, Isabella interrupted, her voice devoid of emotion. From now on, call before you show up. My husband doesn't like having strangers in our home. My hand trembled as I held the ladle. My husband, she had claimed me again, shutting Julian down and asserting my place in her life. Julian looked like he had been slapped. He grabbed his companion and retreated in silence. That evening, Isabella did something she never did. She skipped the study and sat down at the dining table. As she sipped the chicken soup I had prepared, she looked up and told me not to let Julian's comments get to me. I forced a small smile and told her I was fine, calling her Miss Sterling out of habit. She winced at the formality, telling me that I should use her first name when we were alone. It felt strange and intimate to finally say it, Isabella. He's been out of the country for a long time and doesn't know how things work here, she said, setting her bowl down and looking me in the eye. You are a good man, Davis. My heart skipped a beat. It was the first genuine compliment she had given me in 3 years. Those 5 words felt like a wave of warmth spreading through my entire body. I felt my face flush and quickly looked down at my plate, focusing on my food to hide my reaction. I told her to keep eating before the soup got cold, and she gave a quiet nod. We finished the meal in silence, but for the first time, the icy tension that usually filled the penthouse seemed to thaw just a little. That small spark of hope was quickly snuffed out by the cold hand of reality. Chloe Bennett, Isabella's loud and entitled socialite friend, called her private line while I was nearby mopping the floor. Her voice was so piercing that I could hear every word of the conversation. Bella, Have you lost your mind? Chloe shrieked through the phone. Julian is finally back in New York, so why are you still playing house with that nobody? We all know that contract was just a stall tactic to keep your grandfather happy until Julian returned. The man of your dreams is here, so stop wasting time. Kick Davis to the curb and marry Julian already. Her words hit me like a physical blow, sending my heart plummeting. To them, I was nothing more than a seat warmer, a disposable tool to be discarded once the real player arrived. All the effort and care I had poured into this home for 3 years was apparently just a pathetic, one-sided performance in their eyes. There was a long, agonizing silence on Isabella's end, long enough for me to fear she agreed with her friend. But then she spoke, her voice low and as unyielding as iron. "Chloe, I'm going to say this one last time," she said. "Davis is my husband, not a temporary fix, and for the record, I was never waiting for Julian. If you ever disrespect my marriage again, our friendship is over," she added before slamming the phone down. The silence that followed was deafening. I could have heard a pin drop on the rug. I stood there frozen, feeling like an intruder who had stumbled upon a secret I was never meant to hear. Isabella looked at me with a mix of regret and fierce determination. "You heard that, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded, my throat feeling like it was filled with sand as I apologized for eavesdropping. I tried to smile, though I'm sure it looked more like a grimace, and told her it was fine because Chloe was only saying what everyone else was thinking. "That is not the truth," Isabella said, standing up and walking toward me. The soft cream cashmere she wore made her look less like a corporate shark and more like a real person. She stopped inches away, looking me directly in the eyes as she told me that I had never been just a placeholder to her. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stay grounded, warning myself not to read too much into it. She was likely just protecting her own image. She couldn't have people thinking her husband was a pushover without it reflecting poorly on the Sterling name. A few days later, the company held a massive gala to celebrate 3 years since the IPO. As the CEO's husband, my attendance was mandatory, marking my debut into high society. The ballroom was stunning, with massive crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over a sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. Everyone there wore perfectly practiced smiles while discussing market trends and futures, conversations that were completely over my head. Even in the expensive suit Isabella's assistant had picked out, I felt like an intruder among the elite. I had one goal: stay quiet, stay in the background, and don't embarrass my wife. Isabella was breathtaking that night in a crimson mermaid gown that hugged every curve, accented by a diamond necklace that captured every light in the room. With her hair swept up, she looked like a flame made of ice, naturally drawing every eye in the room. A constant stream of executives and investors swarmed her with champagne in hand. I, on the other hand, was tucked away in a quiet corner where I spent my time methodically working my way through the dessert buffet. Well, if it isn't Mr. Vance, hiding in the corner and stuffing his face, a mocking voice called out from behind me. I turned to find Julian Davenport looking polished and smug, flanked by a group of wealthy trust fund types. He looked me up and down with a sneer that he didn't even bother to hide. "Since you spend all your time in the kitchen, Davis, I assume you have some expert critique for the catering," Julian joked, prompting a wave of laughter from his friends. One of the guys asked if I was really the one, and Julian nodded with a smirk, confirming that I was indeed the legendary Mr. Sterling. He took a slow sip of his drink, looking thoroughly amused by my presence. "Isabella has always had a soft spot for strays," Julian continued. "She probably just saw how pathetic he was and handed him a meal ticket." His friends chimed in about her charity work, asking me what it felt like to be a kept man. Every insult felt like a blade, and I had to clench my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms to keep from reacting. I knew that if I caused a scene, it would only humiliate Isabella, so I took a deep breath and forced a calm expression. "It is my absolute privilege to take care of my wife," I said quietly. My calm response caught them off guard, momentarily silencing their laughter. Julian's smirk vanished, clearly annoyed that a house husband had the nerve to talk back to him. He stepped into my personal space and hissed that I shouldn't get ahead of myself. "You are just a human shield against her grandfather. Nothing more, he whispered. Once she and I are married, the first thing I'm going to do is toss you out with the rest of the garbage. His words were like poison, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. Just as I was about to snap, a familiar, cool voice cut through the tension. "What is going on here?" Isabella asked, appearing at my side and sliding her arm through mine. She gave Julian and his friend a look that could have frozen boiling water. Their smug expressions vanished instantly. "We were just having a little fun with Davis," Julian stammered, trying to play it off. "A joke," Isabella repeated, her eyes narrowing as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You think it is funny to disrespect my husband? Julian, who exactly do you think you are?" Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of a death sentence. The air around us felt heavy, and Julian's friends looked like they wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Julian's face turned a deep, embarrassed red as he tried to backpedal, claiming he didn't mean it that way. "Then what did you mean?" she demanded, refusing to let him off the hook. "Tell me exactly what you just said to my husband." Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed. Isabella gave a sharp, cold laugh before turning her gaze to his friends, informing them that none of them were in a position to judge her husband. They all looked at their shoes, unable to handle her intense stare. In that moment, Isabella was like a lioness guarding her territory, radiating a power that made everyone else seem small. My heart was racing, and I felt her grip on my arm tighten just a fraction, a silent gesture of solidarity. "And one more thing," she said, her eyes locking back onto Julian with a gaze like ice. "Davis Vance is my husband, now and forever. If I ever hear you utter another disrespectful word about him, we are done. I will cut you out of my life so fast your head will spin, we won't even be acquaintances." She didn't wait for a response. She simply turned and led me toward the center of the room, leaving a humiliated Julian standing there alone. Every eye in the ballroom followed us, a mix of shock and envy rippling through the crowd. I felt like I was under 1,000 spotlights, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't nervous because Isabella was right there with me. She walked me up onto the stage and took the mic from the MC, clearing her throat to get the room's attention. Her voice was clear and commanding as it echoed through the hall. "Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us to celebrate Sterling Industries," she began. "I want to take a moment to formally introduce the man standing here with me." She turned toward me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine warmth in her usually guarded eyes. "This is Davis Vance," she said. "He is the man I love, and he is my husband. I am well aware of the rumors and the gossip surrounding our marriage, and tonight, I am setting the record straight. The best decision I have ever made wasn't an IPO or a billion-dollar merger. It was choosing to marry this man 3 years ago. He might not have come from money or a famous family, but in my eyes, he is worth more than any other man on this planet. He is the reason I can walk into a boardroom and fight for this company every day without a single worry. Because of him, my cold, empty penthouse finally feels like a home. He is my rock and my greatest strength, the only person I want to come home to for the rest of my life." Her words filled the room, leaving the entire audience in a state of stunned silence. I stood there next to her, my mind completely blank as if someone had pulled the plug. I stared at her, mesmerized by the raw emotion and certainty in her eyes, feeling like I had stepped into a dream that was too good to be true. Was she really doing this? Was she confessing her love for me in front of the entire world? My heart was beating so hard I thought it might actually burst. I could see Julian in the crowd, his face a twisted mask of rage and jealousy, while Chloe looked like she was about to drop her drink in shock. The rest of the Sterling family looked just as floored as everyone else. While the room watched in silence, Isabella leaned in, stood on her tiptoes, and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. I caught the faint, clean scent of her perfume, and in that moment, it felt like my entire world had been set ablaze with light. The ride home was quiet, with only the hum of the engine filling the car. Isabella leaned back against the leather seat with her eyes closed, looking exhausted as the city lights flickered over her face. My heart was still racing, and I could still feel the ghost of her kiss on my skin. I replayed the events of the gala over and over in my head like a movie. I wondered if she had meant those words or if it was just a calculated performance to finally get rid of Julian. I was terrified to ask, fearing that the truth would shatter the beautiful illusion I was currently living in. Isabella's eyes suddenly fluttered open, catching me in my thoughts. "What is on your mind?" she asked, her voice soft and slightly raspy from the long night. I stammered that it was nothing, but she just watched me, her face illuminated by the passing streetlights in a way that made her impossible to read. "Davis," she whispered, as if she could read my mind, "I meant every single word I said tonight." I stopped breathing for a second and turned to look at her, searching her face for any sign that she was just playing a part. I found nothing but absolute sincerity in her gaze. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my voice sounding raw and broken. It was a stupid question, but I had to know. She gave a small, self-deprecating smile and asked if I had always seen her as a cold-blooded person who was incapable of love. I shook my head immediately, unable to find the words to disagree. "The truth is that they were right about me," she sighed. "I was raised to believe that business is about profit, not feelings, and that marriage was just another way to secure power. I spent my whole life avoiding it, viewing the idea of a husband as nothing more than a heavy burden. When my grandfather got sick 3 years ago, he used my guilt to force my hand, and I felt like I had no choice but to agree to a contract marriage. I picked you because you were a blank slate with no baggage or hidden agendas. I figured we would just be business partners, keeping things professional until the contract ran its course." She looked down at my hands, noticing the calluses I had developed from years of taking care of the house. "I was wrong about everything," she said, her voice softening into something tender. "For 3 years, you've been up at dawn every single day just to make sure I had a hot breakfast waiting for me. You always knew exactly when I needed a heating pad or ginger tea without me ever having to ask. No matter how late I worked, I always came home to a warm meal and a light in the window. I remember the night I had that terrible fever. You didn't leave my side for a single second. I woke up to find you passed out in a chair next to my bed, looking exhausted from looking after me. Then there was that night I drank too much at a gala and made a mess of the car. I expected you to be disgusted, but you just cleaned everything up without a word of complaint. You carried me to bed and stayed with me until morning just to make sure I was okay." She went on, listing all the small things I thought she had never noticed. "You have to understand, Davis," she said, her voice wavering, "no one in my entire life has ever been this good to me. You did it all without wanting a single thing in return. My parents only cared about my performance and the stock price, and my friends only cared about the sterling name and what I could do for them. Even Julian's affection was always tied to family alliances and business deals. But your kindness was the only thing in my life that was pure. You were the warmth I never knew I needed, like a light slowly filling up the dark, cold corners of my heart. I found myself actually looking forward to coming home every day. I wanted your soup, and I wanted to see you standing there in the kitchen. I was even jealous of the groceries sometimes because they got all of your attention and care. I started to dread the day the contract would end because I couldn't stand the thought of you leaving. That massive penthouse would feel like a desert without your cooking and the warmth you brought into it. I realized I didn't know how to be alone anymore. When Julian came back and everyone expected me to run to him, it finally clicked for me. My heart had belonged to you for a long time. Davis, I love you, she whispered. It isn't about the contract or just being used to having you around. I love who you are, your kindness, and the way you quietly take care of me. Her eyes, usually so sharp and professional, were shimmering with unshed tears. I sat there in total shock, unable to process what I was hearing. She had noticed everything. She had cherished every little thing I did. What I thought was a pathetic, one-sided crush had blossomed into something we both shared. A wave of pure joy hit me, so hard it felt like the world was spinning. My eyes began to sting with tears as I reached out a shaking hand to touch her face. She didn't pull away. Instead, she caught my hand and pressed it against her cheek. Her skin was cool against my palm, a perfect contrast to the heat radiating from my body. Davis, she said, looking at me with a vulnerability that broke my heart, let's tear up the contract. I want us to be a real husband and wife for the rest of our lives. Is that okay with you?" I couldn't hold back my emotions any longer. I nodded frantically and managed to choke out a yes. I pulled her into my arms and held her as tight as I could. After 3 years of loving her from a distance, she was finally mine. I breathed in the scent of her hair and felt her small frame trembling against me, matching my own excitement. The city lights outside blurred into a river of stars as we drove through the night. With her in my arms, my world felt brighter than any galaxy. Once we had finally been honest with each other, everything began to shift. We kept our separate rooms for a while because she insisted I had to actually court her before we made things official. Even so, the wall between us was gone for good. She started sharing the details of her day with me, and we spent our evenings curled up on the couch watching movies. She would often sneak up behind me while I was cooking, wrapping her arms around my waist and resting her head on my shoulder like a kitten. The office gossip at Sterling Industries shifted from shock to pure jealousy as people saw how happy she was. Even Chloe came by to give me a sincere apology, admitting she had been an idiot and almost ruined everything for Isabella. Life was perfect, with the sole exception of Julian. He went quiet for a bit after the gala, but he eventually resurfaced with a new angle to get close to Isabella. He claimed to have started an overseas investment firm and presented her with a flashy proposal for a new energy project, hoping for a partnership with Sterling Industries. "This is the future of the industry. Isabella, it is a guaranteed win," he pitched with practiced confidence in her office. He promised a 300% return within 3 years if she invested. Isabella was a shark when it came to business, so even though she couldn't stand the man, she didn't dismiss the proposal without looking at the numbers. She had a strict rule about keeping her personal feelings out of her professional life, so she sent the project to her analysts for a full review. I didn't know the first thing about venture capital, but my gut was screaming that something was wrong. Julian was trying too hard, and the naked greed in his eyes made my skin crawl. I told Isabella to be careful, mentioning that I had a bad feeling about Julian's motives. She just laughed and pinched my cheek, calling me her sweet, innocent husband. She assured me that she wasn't easily fooled and that she would never gamble with the company's future without a full report from her experts. I trusted her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Julian was up to something, so I decided to do some digging on my own. I might have been a simple clerk, but my college roommate was a tech genius who taught me the basics of ethical hacking. I wasn't a pro, but I knew enough to find things that weren't meant to be found. I spent my nights digging into Julian's background and his supposed investment firm, and what I uncovered was chilling. The company was a total shell registered in a tax haven with zero actual business activity. His entire persona as a successful international businessman was a complete fabrication. I managed to get my hands on his international financial records through some back channels, and the numbers were horrifying. He had a massive history of high-stakes gambling in Las Vegas and Macau. He had literally blown millions of dollars at the tables, one astronomical loss after another. I even found posts on underground forums with his picture on them, with creditors offering rewards for his location to collect on massive debts. He wasn't a success story. He was a desperate addict who had come back to New York to pull off one final scam. His target was Isabella and the entire Sterling Empire. He was trying to use their history to manipulate her into a massive investment that he would use to pay off his debts before disappearing. It made my blood run cold to realize he wasn't just after her money. If he succeeded, he would destroy the company's reputation and potentially bankrupt the entire Sterling Industries capital chain. I compiled everything and brought it straight to Isabella. She sat in silence as she scrolled through the gambling logs and the collection notices I had found. Her expression shifted into a mask of pure ice, and her knuckles turned white as she gripped the mouse. "I can't believe Julian Davenport thought he could play me like this," she said, her voice dripping with a lethal kind of fury. I knew then that Julian was a dead man walking. When I asked her what she was going to do, she looked up at me with a predatory glint in her eyes and a chilling smile. "If you want to play games, we can play," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm going to give him a performance he will remember for the rest of his life, and I'm going to make him pay for every bit of his greed." For the next few days, She was the picture of professional calm, acting as if everything was business as usual. She had her team draft a glowing report on the energy project, making it look like the deal of the century. Then she reached out to Julian and told him that Sterling Industries was moving forward with a $500 million investment. Julian was ecstatic, convinced that his plan was working perfectly. He went right back to treating me like dirt, looking at me with that same old smug contempt. At a dinner right before the signing, he actually had the nerve to tell me, in front of Isabella, that he would throw me a few crumbs once the project took off so I could finally know what it felt like to have my own money. You should try earning your keep for once instead of living off your wife, he added with a smirk. I just smiled and kept my mouth shut, actually feeling a bit of pity for the guy. He had no idea he was walking into a trap. Isabella was the picture of grace, even raising her glass to toast to their future partnership. To a successful partnership, Julian, she said, her smile as beautiful and as deadly as a poisonous flower. Julian was so captivated that he downed his drink in one go, promising her that he wouldn't let her down. The official signing was scheduled for 3 days later at the corporate headquarters. Julian showed up looking like $1 million, radiating a confidence that was almost nauseating. He brought along a team of supposed experts who were clearly just actors he had hired for the day. Isabella took her place at the head of the conference table, flanked by her top executives, and she made it very clear that I was to sit right beside her. Julian gave me a look of pure annoyance when he saw me at the table, but he didn't say anything, likely viewing me as nothing more than a trophy. Everything went according to plan, and once the lawyers gave the green light, Isabella reached for her pen. Julian was practically vibrating with excitement, his eyes locked onto the pen as if it were made of solid gold. $500 million was just one signature away from hitting his offshore account. It was enough to clear his debts and leave him with a fortune to waste. But just as the pen touched the paper, Isabella stopped. She looked up at Julian with a slow, deliberate smile that made the room go cold. "Before I sign this, Julian, I have a little gift for you," she said. Julian looked confused, asking what she meant, but she just gave a light clap of her hands. The heavy doors of the boardroom swung open, and a group of grim-faced police officers walked in, followed by several very large, very angry-looking men. The man leading the second group had a thick gold chain and a dragon tattoo that snaked up his arm. The moment Julian saw him, he turned as white as a sheet. "Mr. Costello, what are you doing here?" he stammered, his knees buckling as he nearly collapsed. Costello didn't say a word. He just walked up and delivered a backhand that sent Julian spinning. Blood bloomed at the corner of Julian's mouth as Costello loomed over him. "You pathetic piece of trash. You owe my casino in Vegas $30 million. And you think you can just play billionaire in New York? Did you really think you could hide from us?" The police moved in to secure the room while the lead detective flashed his badge. "Julian Davenport, you are under arrest for contract fraud, money laundering, and a laundry list of financial crimes," he announced. Julian collapsed onto the floor, looking up at Isabella with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. "You set me up, Isabella," he gasped. Isabella stood up and looked down at him with nothing but pure disgust. "Setting you up would imply you were a worthy opponent, Julian," she said coldly. She walked over and threw the stack of evidence I had found right into his face. The papers detailed every single one of his crimes and debts. "I was going to let you walk away with some dignity because of our history," she said, her voice like a blade. "But you got greedy and tried to steal from my company, and more importantly, you repeatedly disrespected my husband. You crossed a line you can never come back from. Did you honestly think you were smart enough to play me?" she asked. "Your project was a joke from the start, and today I am just showing the world who you really are." Julian was trembling, his face a ghostly shade of gray as the reality of his situation set in. He knew he was finished and tried to crawl toward Isabella to beg for forgiveness. I stepped in front of her, blocking his path, and told him that the game was over. A police officer stepped in and clicked the handcuffs around his wrists, ending his run once and for all. As they dragged him away, Julian looked at us with a mix of pure despair and murderous rage. Costello and his crew were also taken into custody for their own crimes, finally bringing the whole mess to an end. Isabella came over to me and took my hand, our fingers interlacing perfectly. She looked up at me with eyes that shone like stars and called me her hero. Julian was eventually convicted on all counts and sentenced to life, ensuring he would never bother us again. Our lives finally returned to normal, but it was a new kind of normal, one filled with a sweetness I had never known. Isabella took our old contract and personally fed it into the shredder. From this moment on, there are no more deals between us, she declared. Just a marriage license and a future. I finally moved my things into the master suite where I belonged. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, I was in the kitchen wearing an apron and prepping dinner. Isabella snuck in wearing a pair of ridiculous fleece pajamas with rabbit ears. "It smells amazing. Were you cooking?" she whispered, wrapping her arms around my waist and nuzzling her head against my back. "I'm making that sweet and sour pork you've been begging for all week," I said, continuing to chop vegetables. She cheered and planted a loud kiss on my cheek, calling me the best husband ever. Ever since we made things official, she had turned into a completely different person, constantly affectionate and playful. The ruthless CEO who terrified her competitors was now just a girl who wanted to be spoiled. I told her to get out of the kitchen before she got splashed with oil, but she just clung to me tighter. "I want to stay right here and watch you," she insisted. "Watching you cook is my favorite thing in the world," she said, reaching around me to snag a piece of pork from the tray. Before I could warn her, she popped it into her mouth and started dancing around, yelping about how hot it was. Even though it was burning her tongue, she refused to spit it out, determined to enjoy the snack. "It is so good," she managed to say through the heat. I just laughed and handed her a glass of ice water, feeling my heart melt as I watched her look so genuinely happy. This was all I ever wanted, a simple, quiet life right here in this kitchen. The kitchen was filled with the delicious scent of dinner as I cooked for the woman I loved. The sauce was bubbling on the stove, filling the room with a sweet aroma while the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. I looked into her sparkling eyes, leaned down, and kissed her. The kiss tasted faintly of sweet and sour pork, but it was the sweetest thing I had ever experienced. Isabella decided that since we had missed out on 3 years of dating, she was going to make up for it. She rented out an entire private theater so we could watch my favorite sci-fi movie in peace. The movie was great, but I barely saw any of it because Isabella spent the entire time clinging to me like a koala. She kept asking for popcorn, then soda, then another kiss. When the credits finally rolled and the lights came up, I assumed our night was coming to an end. I started to stand up, but she caught my arm and told me to wait. She gave me a mysterious wink and told me there was one more surprise. The screen flickered back to life, but instead of a movie trailer, a montage of videos began to play. It started with footage of the day I moved into the penthouse, looking completely lost and out of place in such a fancy apartment. Then it showed clips of me in the kitchen, me tending to the plants on the balcony, and me sitting up late at night waiting for her until I eventually fell asleep on the couch. It was a collection of all the quiet moments of my life from the last 3 years. I looked at her in total shock, and she admitted that she had the housekeeper install cameras because she was too busy and too shy to ask me how I was doing. Her face turned a light shade of pink as she made the confession. "I just wanted to see your daily life," she explained, but eventually, watching those videos became the highlight of my day. The montage ended with a still shot of her kissing my cheek at the gala. Then, a message began to fade in on the screen. "Mr. Davis Vance, 3 years ago I used a contract to trick you into being my husband. Today, I want to know if you will marry me for real for the rest of our lives." Suddenly, the house lights came up, and I realized the theater was packed with people. The entire Sterling family was there, along with my friends and old coworkers, all of them beaming at us. Chloe appeared in the aisle, pushing a massive cake toward the front. Then Isabella, my beautiful Isabella, pulled a small velvet box from her purse. She opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring designed for a man. She looked up at me with eyes that were no longer cold, but filled with more love than I could imagine. "Davis," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "please marry me for real this time." I realized I was crying, the tears I've been holding back finally spilling over. I didn't need words to give her my answer. I just pulled her into my arms and kissed her with everything I had. That kiss told her everything she needed to know, leaving no room for doubt. The theater erupted into cheers and applause as we held each other. In that moment, I finally understood my place in the world. I wasn't a shadow husband or a contract partner anymore. I was Isabella Sterling's husband, her home, and her hero. We live in a world that worships power, often forgetting that heroes don't always stand in the spotlight. True success isn't measured by the size of a contract, but by the fact that when you come home exhausted, there is someone there with a warm meal and a light left on for you. If you feel like your efforts are going unnoticed, remember that a shadow isn't lowly. It is the very foundation that allows the light to shine. Real strength doesn't come from wealth. It comes from the simple, pure bond of two people looking out for each other. I hope you find the strength to face the world and a warm home to return to when the battle is over.